Thursday, 18th June 2026. 3 Asia-Pacific AI stories before your first coffee. New Delhi's data protection regime has shifted from drafting to enforcement, with the digital personal data protection rules now phasing in over 18 months and major obligations landing in May 2027. The Data Protection Board's budget rose fivefold in the latest allocation, a clear signal that the government intends to staff up and pursue compliance actions rather than let the framework sit on paper. The timeline puts India on a parallel track with the EU's AI Act rollout, but with a distinctly different tension. The India AI mission is simultaneously pushing to unlock large local data sets for domestic model training. Why it matters. Builders training models on Indian data now face a hard compliance clock, and the May 2027 deadline is close enough that data pipeline audits need to start this year, not next. Capital allocators backing Indian AI startups should expect due diligence costs to rise as the Data Protection Board begins flexing its new budget through audits and enforcement notices. The deeper tension to track is between the DPDP regime's consent and purpose limitation requirements and the India AI mission's stated goal of making large Indian data sets available for domestic foundation model development. Those two policy impulses will collide first in healthcare and financial services, where both the richest training data and the strictest data obligations sit. Compliance infrastructure vendors serving the Indian market stand to benefit early. Seoul's AI Basic Act took effect this week, making South Korea the first country in Asia to enforce a comprehensive AI statute. The law consolidates 19 earlier legislative proposals into a single framework, covering transparency obligations, safety requirements, and content labeling duties. And it extends jurisdiction to overseas providers serving the Korean market. Administrative fines, however, are held back by a 1-year grace period, placing the binding compliance deadline in early 2027. Why it matters? The grace period is the operational detail builders and compliance teams should be tracking. For the next 12 months, the Act functions as a regulatory signal rather than an enforcement tool, giving domestic players like Naver and Kakao, along with foreign model providers selling into Korea, a window to align product pipelines with labelling and safety mandates before penalties bite. Capital allocators watching Asia II governance now have a concrete regional benchmark. Korea's framework is broader than Japan's voluntary guidelines and more prescriptive than anything Singapore or India currently enforces. The second-order effect worth watching is whether this statute accelerates reciprocal adequacy talks with the EU, potentially giving Korean AI firms a smoother path into European markets while raising the compliance floor for everyone else operating in the region. Asia's II regulatory landscape in 2026 runs across a wide spectrum, from South Korea's binding AI Basic Act, in force since January, to ASEAN's voluntary ethics guide, with no single unified rulebook governing the region. China enforces compliance through mandatory labelling of AI-generated content. Japan leans on soft law and industry self-regulation, and India channels most AI oversight through its existing data protection regime. The practical result is a patchwork where cross-border operators must map every jurisdiction a model touches and default to the strictest applicable standard. Why it matters? Any team shipping AI products across multiple Asian markets now faces a compliance flaw set by South Korea's act, regardless of where the model was trained or where the company is headquartered. Builders targeting ASEAN may enjoy lighter obligations today, but the direction of travel points toward tighter rules as member states draft national legislation modelled on Korea's framework. Capital allocators should price in rising regulatory divergence when backing cross-border AI platforms, because a model cleared for Tokyo may still need structural changes to serve Seoul or Beijing. The second-order effect worth tracking is whether Korea's strict baseline becomes the de facto regional template, pulling softer regimes toward binding obligations faster than their current timelines suggest. That is your AI in Asia briefing for today. Stay sharp, build well. See you tomorrow.